presentation, just letting a few more come in, and we're just about bang on time. I think this is going to go for an hour. There's a lot to get through. There's a lot going on in the world at the moment. So let me launch and be conscious. I also know this presentation, we will have a replay available to both clients of McGregor Wealth Management, but also some other businesses that we deal with. So to those listening on the replay, this is recorded on the 2nd of April at 2 p.m. Queensland time. So, yeah, and a massive amount going on in the world. It's impossible to turn on the news and not see something about coronavirus. Now I'm just going to turn off my video so you can see the screen. And what I want to go through today is to give you an update on where we're at right now. I want to point out that for anyone watching who's not a client of ours as we speak, this is all general advice. That just means, for those of you I don't know, this advice may or may not be suitable. You should get advice, whether that's from us or someone else, or do your own research, but seek out good advice. I'm going to talk about planning, etc., as part of this. I'm going to look at today, I'm going to look at where we're at, both health-wise and financially. This is two crises in one. It's a financial crisis that's been caused by a health crisis. It's unprecedented, and it's the first major financial crisis that we've had that wasn't caused by financial stuff. So we didn't come out of this with a boom. This was caused by a health crisis first. And I'll talk about that in more detail. I'm going to talk about what's brought us here, how this has transpired over the last 2 months. I'm going to talk about the emotional cycle, and this is really important because the media is pounding us with bad news. The media is loving this. They've got us, well, not us, hopefully, but they've got most of the public addicted to watching them, and that is their sole intent. Media subscriptions are through the roof around the world. People are paying up to get more media. This is the best time the media has had since the internet started. We're going to revisit sound principles around investing. I'm going to have a look at what lies ahead. Now, I'm not a virus expert. I'm not a health expert. I have been dealing in financial markets since the 80s, and 35 years in financial markets and 22 years of advising clients, and that includes through the tech wreck, through the GFC, and now through this. So this is what I call hands-dirty experience. I'm going to talk about a bear market survival guide. So not only survival, but for how those that are in good position can absolutely prosper during this. And talk about strategies we've been putting in place with our clients. And a lot of these strategies, they're not rocket science. They're just having the confidence to do smart things. And I'll talk about how we do that. I'm going to go through a real-life case study of a new client that we're working with right now, who's literally the most recent new client. I've changed the names, of course. At the end of this, I'm going to go through my #1 tip for achieving financial independence. And financial independence, or an awesome financial independent retirement, no matter what the conditions. And of course, that takes time. But we've been looking after clients for 22 years, so we sort of know what markets are going to do generally, not specifically, not day to day. I can't tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, but we do have a pattern. So let's have a look at the news highlights. And I just this morning, as I was preparing these slides, cut out a few of the highlights. And it's funny, they're already out of date. As I was driving from my home, just down the coast here in the office, I heard the Scott Morrison and others announcing the massive support for the childcare industry, which I think is well done. Some of the news highlights this morning, I laugh at this one, the IMF warning that war-type measures are needed. The IMF is always very good at telling everyone what happens after the event. They're an international firm of bureaucrats. They do some good stuff, but it's funny, most governments around the world have been on this 24/7 for quite a while now. It's interesting. The police in New South Wales have said they've been told this will go for 3 months. None of us know. I was talking to one of my New South Wales clients yesterday, and he's a lawyer, and he was telling me, yeah, this is law. So you're not allowed to leave the house except for so many purposes. But the police have got these powers for 90 days. We've got others saying this could go on for 6 months. My assessment, and whenever I say an assessment during this, it's my personal opinion, and I weigh up the worst case, I weigh up the best case, and I look at the likely case. So my call on the likely case for this is we've got lockdown for somewhere between 6 to 8 more weeks, and we're already 2 weeks in in some of these states. So that gets close enough to the 3 months. And from there, we go back to what was almost stage 0, which was where there was no big public gatherings and borders closed. So I suspect we come out of this and the borders are closed for an extended period. We in Australia are only just coming into the flu season. So we're not like the Northern Hemisphere that are in the middle and at the end of their flu season at the moment. I'm going to talk about some statistics on all of that in a minute. But yeah, I suspect we'll come out of it to a degree in 6 to 8 weeks, but then a bit locked down until they get a few things under control. But I'll talk more. I'm jumping ahead. So on the right-hand side, the cruise ships are stuck off there. No one wants to know them. This is what I love about the media. The media is recording the daily death toll. You can see here, coronavirus update. US cases hit 186. Death passes 360. Now, these are what we'd call in business lag indicators. So in business, you have lead indicators and you have lag indicators. Lead indicators are about what you're doing now, and lag indicators are about the results. So when a company reports its profit, that's a lag indicator. But when it does its marketing and it has so many inquiries, that's a lead indicator. So I'll show you the lead indicators I'm looking at as far as the health crisis goes shortly. But be aware that the media absolutely looks at the lag indicators. They know that scares us. Now, as we go through this, feel free to type in any questions. I'll get to them as I can. I've got one of my colleagues in the room with me who'll alert me to any questions. And yeah, feel free to type some in, and I will answer them, or I'll let you know that we're going to answer them. So none of these particular news that are important, but there's a couple of interesting ones that popped up. And I'll talk about this in a minute, but treatments are going to be a massive part of coming out of this. Already around the world, there's 3 or 4 treatments being used to minimise the impact of the virus on people that catch it. We've seen that very effective in China. There's a couple of drugs, and I can't pronounce them, something chloroxine. But the drugs have been used successfully in malaria treatment and a few others. There's 3 of them being used at the moment. That will minimise the impact of that on people that get it. We're also well and truly, we've now got scientists testing vaccines all around the world. There's human testing going on in a number of places. The confident experts, now keep in mind, in the media at the moment, there's the optimists and the pessimists. Most of the media are pessimists because it keeps everyone watching. The optimists are saying vaccine within 6 months. The pessimists saying within 18 months, let's call it 12 months. The thing that will take its time with that is the human testing. We obviously don't want a vaccine that causes people to have 2 heads, that stops the virus. And keep in mind, this virus is flu-like. I'm going to jump across to a site we use, the site that you're probably all looking at the moment, Worldometers. And just type in if you're looking at Worldometers yourself these days. But Worldometers is showing the number of coronavirus cases, and you go, wow, 1 million coronavirus cases. That's and there's 47 deaths. Now, once again, that's the lag indicator, and nearly 200,000 of those are recovered. But if we go to some other data on Worldometer, and let me just scroll to the top of this. This is Worldometer's main site. This is an amazing website. It shows the population live, 7 billion people and growing. Oops, up we go, down we go. I'm not sure if it's actually timed to the minute. It shows 35 million people born this year, 14 million died this year. So coronavirus, we're just talking about, at the moment, 47,000 deaths out of 15 million deaths so far this year. Now, I'm not diminishing one of those deaths from coronavirus. My job with our clients and the people that we advise is to put this in perspective so they can make smart decisions. Deaths today in the world, 95,000 people and climbing died today. But I want to scroll down to look at some other health issues, and there's some fascinating stats in here, worth having a look at some stage on your own. Let me just close this. But, so far this year, there'll be 3.2 million people that catch some form of communicable disease. Seasonal flu deaths this year are at 123,000. So they're 3 times, roughly, not quite, the amount of coronavirus deaths. So if you look at the flu statistics, every year between 290,000 and 650,000 people die in the world of the flu due to complications from the flu. Now, very important those words, because the people that are dying from coronavirus are dying from complications caused by coronavirus. The vast majority of them are elderly and people that have pre-existing conditions. And certainly the last 3 cases in Australia have been people in their late 70s, 80s and 90s who are already sick and in aged care facilities. So yeah, be careful about how you assess these numbers, and some really good stuff there. I mean, just some other bits and pieces. 2 million deaths caused by cancer this year. What are some of the other ones? 1.2 million deaths caused by smoking. Now, we don't shut the world down and ban smoking. We're happy to let that go ahead, but we're at 47,000 deaths, and I know it's going to get higher. And once again, I do not diminish any of those deaths. I know they're substantial, but just to put it into perspective. So let me go back to the presentation, and sorry, back to the right slide, and here we are. So yeah, that's sort of the news of where we are. I got a message from one of my clients this morning. One of my clients who I've known for 20 years, so a good, hard-working business here in Noosa, and they're off. Hello guys, if you're watching, but they've been off sailing the world for the last few years. But they sent me this slide, and it said, "A smooth sea never made a skilled sailor." And I've never seen this before, but it was quite obvious. It's exactly the same with investing. For those of you that aren't clients of ours, I hope you're getting your information and your advice from people that have been through rough seas and rough investments before, and have looked after people well through that. Let's have a look at what's brought us here case-wise. Let's start off in the top left-hand corner. China started this back in January. We started to get some cases out, and we in the West diminished it. We had a little bit of a panic on the market, but we sort of said, it's in China. It's not going to be that bad. It's only the flu. I said this, nearly everyone in the West said it. Their cases spiked, and that was only when they started testing properly. So in lots of countries, we've seen some spikes when testing has increased. So there's a lot of flaws in every statistic you'll see, whether it's from Worldometer or anything else. Because if we actually knew how many people have had coronavirus right now, because we tested everybody, we'd have more cases, but we'd have much lower death rates, much lower critical illness rates. So China started this, but they actually got it under control. And you can see by mid-February, their cases started to drop. But that's when they started to take off around the world. And Italy was the one in the West that took off. Now, in the East, in Asia, they had a dress rehearsal of this in 2003. It was called SARS. And SARS, at that stage, caused a panic around the world, but it was mainly addressed in Asia. Hong Kong went into full lockdown at that stage. Share markets plummeted. Hong Kong government did massive stimulus, and they eventually came out of it, and most of us can't even remember what that was. But what it meant is that Asian countries, particularly Singapore, Taiwan, China, South Korea, Hong Kong, were very well prepared for this. So they immediately went into action mode. And you can see in South Korea, and South Korea, China, it's always hard to tell whether the cases, whether statistics are true. China does mask some of their statistics. It's a bit of a spin. They don't want the world to look too bad. But South Korea is a democratic, free country, and we saw rising cases, and this is the daily new cases. So it's not, this is the lead indicator. So it's not the lag indicator, which is death, it's the lead indicator. And we saw them peak, and their curve started to flatten. And this is the flattening curve we're watching. Their curve started to flatten in March, and then it dropped down. And we're just seeing now a steady rate of new cases. Now, steady is fine. It's just like the flu. It doesn't lead to an impact on the system. People are talking about second waves and third waves, and they're getting ahead of themselves, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. But then we had sort of, down here is Italy, and the flattening of the curve, what we've seen work in flattening the curve, I'm talking about the curve of daily new cases. There's another curve about hospital intake. But flattening the curve, there's a mixture of social distancing, border closures, travel restrictions, self-isolation, and lockdowns. Asia was very quick to lock down their borders and to test people as they were coming through. The West was very slow. We in Australia were terrible. You know, as soon as China started to show a slowdown, we let all the students in, and they, of course, we didn't stop backpackers, we didn't stop cruises, we didn't stop anything, and most of the cases in Australia have come in via people coming from overseas. So we didn't heed the warnings of the SARS crisis. None of us, no one in the West has done this well at all. There's maybe one or two countries like Iceland, but none of the European countries, not the US, not Australia, did that well to start with. Now, Italy started going up, and if you were reading the press, they made it sound like it was out of control. But eventually, they did their lockdown, they did their social distancing, and for those that have spent time in Italy, you know how hard that would be for the Italians. They're a very friendly country. They live multiple generations together, they eat out, they're very close, they hug regularly, and that's why Italy took off early than most Western countries. And you'll see their curve is in the process of flattening. Now, it's very hard to tell because in all these countries, as testing gets better, and I heard today just before I came in, Australia is getting to the point where we've tested 1% of the population, and we are at the forefront, we're at the leaders of that, if you can believe that the government statistics there, and I've got no reason not to. We're at the leadership of testing, and we've got 1% tested. But as we increase tests, we start to get statistics look like they're jumping, but it's just confirmed that some people have it. And keep in mind, most people that get this do not have dire consequences. Some of them don't even know they've got it. So, yeah, and I'll talk about that a bit more, but and right now we're seeing Italy flatten, we're seeing the US still go up, and the US is probably the thing the markets are going to look at for the next 2 weeks. If the US continues to go up out of control, we'll see more nervousness on markets. If the US starts to flatten their curve, and I'm not talking about, once again, the lag indicators, death rates are going to go up. That's inevitable. I'm looking at these daily new cases. And let's have a look at Australia, but let's also have a think about what gets us out of this. And there's 4 factors that get us out of this. One is increased testing, and that helps because it helps isolate people that have got it. It also helps tell us people that have had it and have passed it, because that feeds into that last factor here, which is herd immunity. So herd immunity is just the fact that some people have had it, so when they come into contact with someone that's got it, they're not going to get it again, or they're less likely to get it again. That means they can't spread it next time around. So as more people get this thing, the spread of it slows down. So testing will help us determine where we are in the herd immunity cycle. The second thing there is treatments. So as I said before, as treatments become more available, and we start to see, as we saw in China, as we saw in Singapore, South Korea, these treatments diminish the effect of the virus on people. And all of a sudden, if you can believe China and some of these, the death rates have plummeted, and I haven't got it up here, but the death rates have plummeted there as people are being able to be treated. It also, if hospitals can supply ventilators and all this stuff, and you've read endlessly about this, that's going to help us get out, and ultimately vaccinations. So if all of a sudden we test everyone, and this is the best case scenario, all of a sudden everyone's tested. We get to find out who's had it, who's got it, isolate them, and we keep testing people regularly, and treatments start to diminish the effect of people, so that by treating people when they get it, they don't develop as critical consequences and less people die. And then as soon as a vaccination is announced, we start to breathe easier. This thing isn't going to go round and around. And also we get an idea of the statistics around the herd immunity. I'm going to jump back to worldometers for a minute, and I'm going to jump back to one of the countries. So let's look at this by countries for a minute. And across here, you can see around the world, the deaths per 1 million of population is 6 people per 1 million of population. So I know that's very unfortunate for those people and their families, but it's a relatively low number. If you get this, you don't die. Now, the total cases per population around the world is 120. But let's scroll down a bit. I want to get to Australia and then compare some of those. And we're way down the list here. So we're getting 200 cases per 1 million of population, and we're testing very well. So we've got this under reasonable control, and our death rate is only 1 per million. And you'll note it's only, out of the total cases, it's only 1 out of every 200. So that's a 0.5% death rate. Early on, you saw the alarmists talking about a 4% death rate, but that's because they were looking at the Italian figures, where you've got 200 out of 1.8, so that's dropped. But initially, the Italians weren't testing everyone, so they didn't actually know how many cases they had. They just knew about, well, most of the ones who died. So initially, they were saying 4 to 10% of people were dying from it. That was never true. They just hadn't tested enough to know. So we've got, in Australia, 1 out of 200 cases dying. That's 0.5%. And while that's sad and tragic for each of those, it's about the same level as flu. Flu ranges from 0.1 to 0.5% of the death rate of complications, so quite similar. So let me go back to our presentation. So I'm looking at the lead indicators for me, which is the new cases. So in Australia, we're seeing a diminishing here. This big spike that my cursor's over now was when we started doing extra testing and we had some cruise people come in and get tested. So it jumped temporarily. Those people already had it. They just weren't in the numbers. So that's the case for a lot of these statistics, but we're starting to see a slowdown and a flattening of the curve in Australia. So if we keep up that self-isolating for the 90 days or whatever we're going to do, we will beat that. And in parallel to that, if we watch the testing, if we watch the treatments developing, I dare say, we will get this under control. Well, I know that we will. So let's have a look at financial markets where we are right now. Now, this chart shows the black line is the Australian share market. It's VAS, so it's a stock that many of our clients hold. It's just the Aussie share market. It's an index fund. So in the last 3 months, that's dropped 25%. It was down about 35%, so we've bounced off the bottom. Now that's down, so at 35%, that's one of the 6 worst downturns we've had. But let's have a look at some of these others. So the blue line here is international shares. It's actually the top 100 companies in the world. So at the same time today, international shares, the top 100 companies in the world are only down 8%. Now, why is that the case? Well, in their own markets, they're actually down similar levels, 25%. But this orange line is the Aussie dollar, so against the US. So our Aussie dollar has dropped during this. So anyone who's holding overseas shares, we've had the benefit to the tune of about 16%, which has softened the blow of those international shares. And the green line here is roughly around a balanced growth approach. So at this point, a growth fund would be down around 14% and a balanced fund around 10%. Now, there's a wide variety of stuff out there depending on who you're with and how you're structured. To put it in perspective over a year, same numbers. So the black line, Aussie shares, and we're down. I've just got to move one of my controls. And we're down about 18% for the year. International shares are actually up for the year. Can you believe that? Because of the Aussie dollar, which has fallen 15%, those of us that own international shares are actually up 5% for the year on average. And once again, depending on what you own, that will vary. And a balanced approach potentially down around between sort of 4 and 8%, depending on the type. So for the reviews we've been doing with our clients in the last 2 days, we're seeing down around 5% to 10%, depending on where they're at. That's not too bad. So let me get some perspective about this. So the Aussie market, and by the Aussie market, I mean the ASX 200, peaked at about 7162. At the trough, and I'll talk more about this, the psychology around markets in a minute, and the trough we got to about 4546, and I know the pessimist, and I'm hoping I haven't got too many pessimists tuned in today, but I know there'll be some. The pessimists will say, well, we might not have seen the bottom yet, and I agree. I can't tell you with 100% certainty that we've seen the bottom, but watch the next bit of slides, combine with what we've just talked about, and you can help make up your own mind. But at the peak, we were down 36%. Now, and I'll just go back, down 36%, and at the time of recording this as at close of business last night, the Aussie share market down around 26%. Now that ignores dividends, so if you take dividends of about 4%, then it's slightly less than that. So 36% puts us in the top 6 of downturns. I just want to touch on the market cycle around emotions here. Markets go through, picture them like a pendulum. They go from greed to fear. Now, greed is just what we call fear of missing out. Every month for our clients, we send out a market assessment of where we think the market's at based on this diagram at the top, which is just what I draw on whiteboards for clients. The market goes through three main phases: a boom, a bust, and most of the time we're in a wall of worry. Now, in the past, all of the busts have happened after a boom. This is the first time, certainly since 1890, that we've had a bust that hasn't had a crazy boom first. And I know we were a little bit high, and I'll come onto that in a minute. So it's the first time because this has been caused by a health crisis rather than financial excesses, as we saw. So have a look at this roller coaster that markets go through. We're somewhere between panic and relief at the moment. My view is we're somewhere around the hope stage, where particularly we can see that if we keep doing what we're doing, we're going to come out of this. I'll talk more about government stimulus and things in a minute, which is helping to put a bottom under the market. So we're somewhere near the bottom. I don't know if we're at the bottom, if we've passed it. I suspect, this is my opinion once again, and I give this to you with 35 years of experience, but once again, I'm not a health expert, although I do know a lot about statistics, and all I'm looking at is the statistics on this coming through at the moment and putting some reality around it. So I think we've passed the bottom, and I'm very conscious that as I record this can come back to haunt me. And as I said, what it would take to go down worse than it is now is more bad news. And I'm not talking about bad news of the death cases rising or of the lag indicators rising. I'm talking about the lead indicators, the new cases getting substantially worse. Now, the big wild card at the moment is the US. So if the US continues to get worse and there's no sign of flattening there, that may cause us to dip back down below where we were. But if the US does get some level of control, and make no mistake, this is a challenge for the US. They're the freest country in the world, and that means and I'm just going to have a look and draw some questions at the moment, and I've got some good stuff, and I'll pause on that. I'll come back to some of those, Alex, and yeah, thank you. Keep throwing away those questions. Yeah, I haven't looked at all the countries here. Some of the countries around the world, and particularly the more third world countries in Asia and Africa, are probably going to have some chronic statistics, but they may not be any worse because they may just let it spread quickly, and it will cause their vulnerable people to die. So they'll get through it quicker. They may not go into lockdowns and the other. So we're actually witnessing a fascinating social experiment right now, and there'll be a massive debrief of the world as we come out of this. So back to here, I mean, the cycle of emotions, we're somewhere around here. Could we have more panic? Potentially. Only time will tell. So a quote, my favourite quote from Warren Buffett is to be fearful when others are greedy and greedy when others are fearful. And Warren Buffett is the most experienced and successful investor. I was going to say of our lifetime, but of his lifetime, he's 89. He's still doing well with this stuff. He's absolutely amazing. I've no doubt he's buying at the moment. He's very quiet at the moment. I'd love to be a fly on the wall between him and Bill Gates. They're buddies. Bill Gates has got quite a lot of knowledge around this sort of stuff. There was a TED Talk where he predicted a similar type thing to this, which is quite amazing to watch now when it was recorded in 2015. Look, I'm going to get into some key principles to stick to here. And the big challenge to good investing is around these things. Investing is and can appear really complex. We're not actually designed to be good investors. We hear a rustle in the grass and our prehistoric brain just hears trouble, and we want to freeze, fight, or run, fight or flight. So we're not very good at being investors because we react to things. Now, if we're not clear on our purpose and our definitions, we also are not clear about what we're doing. So let me give some definitions, because I hear different people talk about different things, particularly during crisis like this. So I want to distinguish quickly between four major ways that you use your money to make more money. Saving is just simply where you put your money aside, usually in the bank, save up to something like a holiday, a house deposit, a car, but you know you're going to spend it. Or it just might be savings for the unexpected. Investing is where you buy good assets that produce rising income, and there's only two assets that produce rising income, and that's shares and property, not counting businesses. And you use that to produce wealth. Speculating is where you're buying things that you think are going to go up. So people buying gold and silver and US dollars and stuff like that, they're speculating. So they're not investing, they're speculating. Warren Buffett right now, as he's buying stuff, is absolutely investing because he will hold those assets for the long term. And then there's gambling where you place a bet. And I'm seeing lots of people gambling at the moment on markets. What I'm talking about and what we look at with our clients is absolutely about investing, nothing else. And we obviously have savings plans for our clients. So I'm not going to talk about speculating and what's going to happen next, but I'm going to talk about sound principles. I'm also going to focus on what we can control. And this is a great diagram that came out of Stephen Covey's work, where he talked about the circle of control, which are the things you can directly control. You know, I can put on my shoes each morning, I can brush my teeth, I can go for a walk, I can eat my breakfast. These are things I can control directly. I've got a circle of influence. Right now, I'm talking to you, my clients and people on various lists that subscribe to us, and I can influence those people. So I have some influence there. And then there's the circle of concern. So right now, I can be concerned about government policy around this, but I don't have any influence. So I can watch it. And what we find in crisis is the vast majority of the population spends all their time in that red zone, worrying about things they can't do anything about, instead of thinking about what they can do. I'm going to be focusing for the rest of this webinar on what you can do. Real strategies, real things you can do, and for our clients, we're already doing them. For those of you that aren't clients, they're things you could do, and once again, do get advice and wait around to the end, and I will share my biggest tips, and they're really important to make sure you do the right things or the smart things during this crisis. Just a few quick things. We make sure all investments are based on a good financial plan. I can't stress how critical this is. If you've got investments at the moment and you don't have a good financial plan that you're confident in, you're more likely to panic. You're more likely to speculate. You're more likely to make bad decisions. So having a solid financial plan from people that you have faith in is absolutely critical to get through situations like this. We are massive students of history, the cycles, and I'm going to talk through those in a minute. And the biggest impact on people's long-term investment success by far is their behaviour. So the people that are panicking right now, they will never be good long-term investors. The people that are chipping away and buying smartly have the potential to be good investors. So I'm going to talk about some of these behavioural traps, and I'm going to talk about what is smart planning. For us, we run a group called GPS. It's based on the concept of a GPS, and it stands for goals, plans, and strategy. But it's exactly like a GPS. Your financial planning should be the same. It's a clear picture of where you are. It's a picture of where you want to get to, and then it's the strategies and actions, or the map to get there. So all our planning, and when I do the case study shortly, you'll see how we do that. But we develop a plan based on your goals. We ultimately put strategies in place, and one of those is smart investing to get to where people need to go. So I get asked, and I've been asked this twice this week by different people on the phone, what's a good investment right now? And I actually always say to them, I can't tell you till I know what financial position you're in. And I'm going to talk more about this. But someone who's in a really strong financial position right now with a good plan can make very different investments to someone who's not in a great financial position, who might need their cash just to live or to fund their business in the next few months. So let's go through my quick 6-step investment lesson. This is a chart by our friends at Andex that goes back to 1950. The dark blue line, the top line, is the value of $100 put in the share market back in 1950 and just left to grow if you compound the interest. And you can see it grows, and at the end of 2018, it was $202,000 from $100. Now you can see it's a wobbly road. We have the boom, we have the bust, and most of the time we're in that wall of worry. And I'll talk more about those. But let's make my quick observations, and this is all you need to know about the share market. The market goes up more than it goes down. That's fairly obvious. It does go down regularly, and sometimes it goes down by a lot. We're in one of those a lot times at the moment. I'll talk about what that means in a minute. It always recovers eventually. Now, this is critical in crises like these. Unless you're a prepper, unless you believe the world's going to end, unless you believe somehow this virus morphs into the plague or Ebola or something like that, unless you believe that civilization is going to break down and we're all going to kill each other, the market will recover, life will recover. I don't believe that's going to happen. I know there's people out there that are having their day in the sun at the moment. There's experts out there. I'm not going to name them. I don't want to give them oxygen, but I've been watching them for years. They predict Armageddon all the time. Now, they're a bit like a broken clock. A broken clock is right twice a day. Now, these guys are right twice every 30 years. They say, see, we predicted this, but they've been predicting markets to go down all the time. So the market always recovers eventually, and you can never predict what it's going to do in the short term. Not me, not Warren Buffett. Warren Buffett makes no attempt to predict what the market does in the short term, but we can always predict what it's going to do in the long run, and that is it's going to go up, but it's going to fluctuate. So there are 6 points, some quick history lessons, and that's 90% of what most people need to know. This is an even better long-term perspective. It goes back to, and I can't get this chart anymore, it only goes to 2011, but it's $1 invested, and you can see it's 281,000 in 2011, and well and truly above that. Now, these red zones are the zones we worry about. It's where the market goes down. And we're in one of the red zones right now. They're pretty rare. In fact, in Australia, since 1900, we've only had, well, this is the 9th one. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I just want to talk about the 3 stages the market goes through, which I've touched on. Firstly, there's the fear. Now, that's at the bottom of the market. That's what we experienced last week, around March 23rd. The market was heading straight down, and it was pretty scary. And people start to panic at those stages. That's what we've talked about. The market at the other end goes through the boom, the FOMO, but most of the time it's in the wall of worry. It wobbles up, it corrects a bit, it wobbles down, but it goes up. So if you draw a line from just before a boom to 5 years after, even through those boom and busts, there's good return every single time. So I can't stress enough, the market is like a pendulum with the emotions swinging like a manic depressive from fear to FOMO. Now keep in mind, FOMO, FOMO is fear of missing out. What's the first word in that? It's fear. So it's swinging from fear of losing everything to fear of not making as much as my neighbour, my brother-in-law, my cousin, the other person at work. So we swing from fear to FOMO. But most of the time we're in between. Make no mistake, right now, for most people, they're in fear mode. And as we said from Warren Buffett, that's the time when most of us can start to do some sensible things. I'm going to skip over that one, but I just want to talk about, make no mistake, we're in a recession right now. A recession is 2 quarters, so that's 3 months of negative growth. So if I liken that to me as an individual, if I'm earning $100 and I'm growing that each year, but then I have 2 quarters where in one I only earn 99 and the next one I only earn 99 as well, that's 2 quarters of negative growth, so we're in a recession. Most recessions, we only go down 1 or 2% in growth. So while it's an issue for those people that lose their job, businesses that fail, for 95 to 90% of people that don't do that, it's not actually that bad. So on this index chart, the light blue vertical bars here are recessions we've had in Australia. So, and if you look at recessions, you'll note something perverse. The bottom of the market in each cycle occurs early on in a recession. Now, technically in Australia, we didn't have a recession in 2008-9, but that was only because we were in the middle of a mining boom. So that sheltered us from a recession. The rest of the world was in the deepest recession, some might say depression, since 1929. So the best time to have bought in history has always been during a recession. Now, if they announce in August that we've been in a recession, we're in a recession right now. We're in April, so we're in the middle of what's likely to be a 2-quarter recession. So it's likely we're seeing the bottom of the market, if we haven't seen it already, that we're likely to see it very soon, subject to all the things I've talked about. So once again, that's psychology of the market, and where we're at the moment, we were down 36%, March the 23rd, and it was feeling pretty horrible. I know personally, I look after well over $100 million for our clients. I'm part of an investment committee that looks after a couple of $1 billion on behalf of our advisors. So we don't sleep well during times like this. As I wake up in the middle of the night, I roll over, I look at the phone, and all during this downturn, I was looking at markets dropping overnight, and by big numbers. And you know, you're hoping it's going to stop, and eventually it does. But if we look at where this fits in, so down 36%. So if we look at this, these are the 8 worst ones since, and the first one here is 1929, the Great Depression. So at 36%, that would put us at, what do we got? 51, that's number 1, 2, 3, 4. It puts us at the 5th worst ever. Now, it's the only one that wasn't caused by a boom. 1929, we had the greatest boom in history in the 20s. All these were booms first. And if we go back to this chart, you'll see before all the busts, there's a boom. Every single one. This is the first time we've just come from a reasonable market. Yes, it was a little bit expensive, but it wasn't in a boom, to a bust purely driven by a health issue, a pandemic. So it's quite, and I hate using this word because the media is using it to death, but it is quite unprecedented. But our job, once again, is to put it into perspective. So I want to reinforce a principle that I think is the most important principle. Now, I'm going to talk about my most important tip at the end of this presentation, but this is one of the most important principles of good long-term investing. Now, there is only 3 ways. So once again, that dark blue line, the share market, there's only 3 ways to lose money on the share market. The first is if you panic and sell. The second is if you have to sell. And the third is if you're not truly diversified. So right now, if you own, heaven forbid, Virgin shares or Qantas shares, you're really worried. And even if you own individual shares, you're worried about all those companies. We, for most of our clients, own predominantly the whole market through low-cost index funds. It's one of our core beliefs and core strategies. Not 100%, but for most clients, between 60 and 90% is in those index funds. So we own the whole market. So we are truly diversified. All of our clients will never have to sell unless something very unusual happens. So our clients are split. We have independent retirees who are retired. They have a backup portfolio to ride through times like this. We call it their reserves, so they never have to sell. So not one of our retired clients has had to sell. And I contrast that to someone who's just in one balance fund, and as they make monthly withdrawals throughout this crisis, they're selling shares. So not one of our clients is having to sell shares at the moment. And so far, touch wood, we haven't had one client that panicked. In the GFC, and we successfully managed $100 million through the GFC for our clients, I had one client panic, and I said, you shouldn't get out. I was right near the bottom, and he said, oh, you'll be able to tell me when to get back in. And I went, no, I won't, because I have no idea what's going to happen in the short term. And if you look back at what happened there, the market jumped 50% from the bottom really quickly. So that particular client and all the panickers, they missed out. Now, at the time they got into term deposits that were around 7 to 8%, so it wasn't too bad. Interest rates for the next 5 years will be lucky to get above 1%. So, and I'll talk more about what this means to investment strategies in a minute. I'm going to start with that now, looking at what happens to markets. That was Australian data I've been going through. This is US data. So this is the US market, and you'll see the green is the periods of expansion. And they're pretty good. This is why we invest in shares. For long-term investors, this is how we make our money. And we make our money because the good companies of the world are so enterprising. And we're seeing this enterprise at the moment with companies doing some amazing things. There's a lot of people making a lot of money during this crisis. So the ones that are enterprising, and that eventually shows up in the share market. But every now and then, we have these periods of fear and FOMO where the market drops. So the US peak to trough was also down 34% in this crisis. So that puts it amongst its top 10 as well, not as much as the GFC, not as much as their tech wreck in around the turn of the century, more so than 1987 for them. US was only 30% in 1987. We were 50% because we're in the middle of a crazy mining boom. So our bubble burst completely. So US was down 34%. It's not down that at the moment. It's more like the 25. And as I said, for those of us Aussies who've invested in the US, we're actually square for the year. have a look at what happens, because it's what happens from here that counts right now. It's not what has happened. That's now dry concrete. Everything ahead of us is wet concrete. We still have the ability to shape it. So when we look at after recessions, after downturns in the past, after 1 year, and this shows small companies and large companies, and we have a mixture of both in our portfolios, but let's just average it out. So that in the 1 year after recession, there's a return of about 20%. In the 3 years after recession, there's a total return that's about 60%. So it's almost 20% per annum, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. So our favourite strategy for our clients who haven't retired yet, and that's most of the people listening, is dollar cost averaging. So whether that's your super or whether that's building a share portfolio, and I thought I'd do a really quick reminder on this, but dollar cost averaging is just where we invest a regular amount each month. So in this case, $1,000, and let's say we're buying a fund that has a price of $1, we get 1,000 units. That's all easy. Now we're not psychologically great at investing. As soon as we invest, we want it to go up, but we know that doesn't happen. And I know most of you have seen me do this slide, but I want to reinforce it because dollar cost averaging through this is one of the best strategies. So let's say the market drops 25%, and we've seen that. The beauty with dollar cost averaging is we're now buying more for our money with our monthly investment, with our quarterly superannuation contribution. We're actually getting more units for our money. And in the cases where the market's dropped 50% and we keep buying, we're getting more again. Now, eventually the market goes up. So in this exaggerated 5-month period where the market's gone down and recovered, we've invested $5,000, and at the end of that, it's actually worth $6,666 because each unit is worth $1, and we've accumulated $6,000. Now, if the market was flat during that period, we'd still be at $5,000. So these dips are brilliant for dollar cost averages. They're brilliant for people that haven't retired yet if they persist with their buying. So that gets me to the strategies. I'm not going to dwell on this. This is the investment strategy that we use for our clients, and it's based on separating their investments into 4 portfolios. I want to just pick out some really important points. For our retired clients, the most important bit here is the reserves. All of our retired clients have between 2 and 4 years worth of cash and short-term fixed income investments that they pull out their monthly payments to live their life. During these downturns, they're drawing on that. Some of them have rung me in the last few weeks to say, hey Rob, we're not travelling for the next year. We don't actually need as much. Can we put some of our reserves into the market? And that's been one strategy we've been doing for those retired clients. For the rest of the portfolio, it's spread across, and I won't go into the detail, but effectively they're highly effective portfolios that take into account both investor behaviour and learning the lessons of history, some of which I've explained in this seminar. The main thing about investor behaviour is making sure you don't mess it up. And we use mess it up just as an acronym to show how most people mess it up. Now, you can find our investment process on our website if you haven't seen it. You can email my office to ask for our investment process video. It's a 41-minute video that goes through this in more detail. But as you look through this, we're seeing this in motion at the moment. The media is just being so negative for the most part. Although I know they're trying to be a little bit positive at the moment because they're scared people are going to switch off completely. So they're starting to show a little bit of good news. Still, my advice is do not watch more than 20 or 30 minutes of news at the moment of day. You'll absolutely go mad and you'll feel like the world's ending every single day. They prey on our emotions, which we've talked about. They push us into that fear zone. And right now, we are obsessed with one issue, coronavirus. We're completely short-term focused. We know that is the enemy for long-term investment success. Anyone that needs cash right now, those 3 ways of losing money, they're in trouble. They've got to sell investments at a bad time. And I won't go through the rest of those. So let me talk about the government responses. We've seen that word again, unprecedented fiscal stimulus through welfare support, small business support. Quite amazing. I happen to be the treasurer of my local surf club. So we're a licensed club. We've got a bar, we've got a restaurant, we've got pokies. We stood down our casuals at the start of this. We've still been paying our permanents. We were about to stand them down. I hope none of them are listening, but they're actually about to be kept on because of the JobKeeper program. So we're able to keep them on through this crisis. Even though we're not open, even though we can't serve a beer, even though we can't serve a meal. So I think it's quite a brilliant strategy. I know it's going to cost us money. I'll talk about that in a minute. And when I say we, it's costing the government, but the government is us. It comes through as higher taxes eventually for us. So we've seen the RBA, who are independent of the government, and the Federal Reserve in America, who are independent of the governments, and Federal Reserves around the world drop rates where they can, but rates are pretty close to zero, so they can't really drop them anymore. They're providing massive liquidity to credit markets, so that means they're the lenders of last resort to the banks, they're directing the banks, and they're throwing money out there pretty much. So they're buying back bonds, they're standing in the bond market. It's what they call quantitative easing, but it's pretty much printing money. All of these might have consequences later, but for now, they provide support. And we've seen the market vote by going up from the bottoms that support is welcome. So we're all focused on the flattening of the curves, and the curve is almost the inverse of the share market at the moment. We're seeing the flattening of the curve with the share market at the bottom, and if we see the flattening of the curve of the virus, we will see that share market curve go up massively. And the last bit of policies have been brilliant. They're looking at ways to pretty much help businesses go into a form of hibernation. And yeah, quite good. And I've got to say, and I'm not very political, but I believe the Australian leaders, particularly federally, are doing a good job. I think there's a bit of a chest-beating competition amongst the state premiers, trying to outdo each other on toughness. I hope they don't kill the economy too much in doing that. They know the federal government's got to bail them out, but we'll see what happens there. But so far, yeah, the responses are working, and I get what we're doing. Where to from here? The million-dollar question. So I looked to South Korea, a democratic country that got people to do the right things, and their new cases have slowed down and steady, and they're out the other side. I'm a firm believer that this too will pass. I can't tell you whether it's 2 months or 6 months, but it will pass somewhere in that sort of time zone as we hit those four things: testing, treatments, herd immunity, and vaccinations. As those things come through and we find out more data, this thing will be consigned to history before we know it. This is an article I wrote in 2008. It was November 2008. The market bottomed in right around March 2009. So at this stage we were down 45%. We'd eventually get down a bit more. I'll talk about that in a minute. But I'm going to drill into some stuff that I wrote there, because right now, as I said before, it's irrelevant to what has happened in the last 3 months. You can't make money out of that now, unless you've got a time machine, and I don't have a time machine, you don't have a time machine. So we can only make money by looking at what's going to happen going forward. So I pull that chart out again. So this chart looks at the biggest downturns we've had in Australia, what our decline was, and what the recovery was in the next 12 months, whether we had a recession or not, the time taken to recover, and this is the important one, this last column, the return during the recovery. Because if we're investing now, we're going to get good returns during recovery. So for most of these, they're spectacularly good. I've added in the July, the GFC. So the GFC was about 21 months. This downturn, in 1987, it took 2 months for the market to go down 49%. This one took less than that. This is looking like it's going to be the fastest downturn in history, but I also think it's going to be one of the shortest recessions in history. We've got the ability for this to be just confined to 2 quarters, because what we're going to see once we clear here is economic activity will ramp up. So we'll then be in a growth phase. There'll be more output around the world as we ramp back in. And it's not going to say everyone's employed overnight. I'm not going to say there's no dire consequences, but we'll be back to growing. So the recession will be short-lived, and this market downturn has the potential to be short-lived as well. No guarantees, but it has the potential to be short-lived. The average increase in all of the last major downturns in 1 year is 30%. So from the bottom of where we're at the market, so the Australian market bottomed at 4,500. So a 30% increase there would take us roughly to 5,800. Let's call it 6,000. So from where we are today, that's about 20% up from where we are today. Not a bad return. And what a bank term deposit's going to do in the next 12 months? They're going to be zero. Maybe they're 1% at best. So very important that we look at the return during recovery. So let me get into the bear market survival tips. I'm probably going to go over here. There is a lot to cover, but I'd say we've got about 15 more minutes if you can stick with me. So my clients have been hearing this regularly. For those of you that aren't clients, or for those of you that have watched our stuff but haven't drawn on our resources yet, don't panic. And I put in there, if you have a good plan, for all of my clients who are watching, you do have a good plan, which you know, stick with the plan. For those of you that don't have a plan, it's probably about time you got a good plan, and quickly. For our accumulators, they're people that are still working, still making money, haven't retired yet. It's time to keep dollar cost averaging. For retirees, they're drawing down as per their plan, and some of them are drawing down less because they can now, and some of them are actually using some of the reserves they've used to top up their market exposure. Now, number 3 is really important here, and sorry, my numbers haven't come out correctly. If you've got the cash and if you've got capacity, this is a massive sale, but you need to make sure your cash flow is rock solid. Now, I know there's people out there who've lost their jobs temporarily, and I know there's a couple watching of my clients. And for our clients that have lost their cash flow, all we've done there is turn off their dollar cost averaging. We don't have to sell anything because we don't borrow to invest in the share market. And we're happy for them to just turn off those contributions. I'll talk about that a bit more. But for the 90% of people that still have jobs and still have solid cash flow, you can actually be opportunistic in this time. So some of the things that you can consider moving up one risk profile. I'll talk more about what this means in a minute. Our retirees bring their reserves down, and turning the news off is a big strategy. But let me talk about strategy. And this is our strategy map. So whenever we do a plan for someone, these are the strategies we look at. And there's not that many strategies of building wealth. One is building your businesses, speculating, etc. For most of you, that's not applicable. Some of you listening are in business, and right now, it's all hands on deck in your businesses, making sure you survive and prosper through this, and I wish you the best of luck with that. I don't believe this is the time to be speculating or trading unless you have masses of spare money that you can afford to lose. That should be money you'd take to the track, gambling money. So, but all getting smart with super, saving tax, getting smart with your debt, building shares smartly, and investment properties where appropriate. My take on all the information we get from all the experts is we're going to see a little bit of weakness in the coming months in property. A couple of factors. One, what most people will do is just pull their property off the market. So for most of us, we don't have to sell, so this doesn't mean anything. For those people that have to sell right now or want to sell, they may have to drop their prices. So that'll come through in results, and we'll see a downturn. In the rental market, we're seeing Airbnb properties come back into the mainstream and get put on for permanent rental. So that's going to affect the rental market for a while. And we're going to have some people who are out of work who are going to come to see their landlords and ask for a rent holiday. I'm a landlord. I have multiple properties. I'm waiting for the calls. I'm hoping my tenants have good jobs at the moment, but I'm prepared if they don't. And of course, the safety net for those landlords is to then go to their bank and ask for a payment holiday. And I think we're going to see more of this in the next few days, more announcements from Frydenberg and Morrison on some stuff around there. But either way, it's going to lead to some weakness in the property market. For those that are cashed up and have opportunity, there may be some good times. And I'll talk about that more, and I'll talk about this. But the strategies we're using with our clients right now, and I've thrown in the sale sign, right now there is a huge sale on shares, 25%. These only come along once, they come along 8 times in a century. These are rare. For those that are cashed up, and I've put the warning up here, only if your cash flow is solid, only if your balance sheet is solid, only if it's part of a good plan, and only if you have access to good advice should you put these into practice. If you need some help, you'll out. I'll talk about how you can do that shortly. But yeah, I can't say that warning enough. Make sure it's part of a good plan. So number 1. So we had clients ring up a few weeks ago. They're in business, and there's a couple on the line as we speak that fall into this. And we said, well, look, your plan is to put in the maximum, $25,000 a year during the year or at the end of the year. Why don't we put it in now, subject to your business having good cash flow? So we've had clients whose business are going well, where we've put their super spare cash or line of credit you have to set up an investment portfolio. Now, refer to the warnings, and I can't say them enough, only if you're rock solid in terms of your balance sheet. By balance sheet, I mean you can service your debt well, or you have no debt out of your investments, and you have your business or your job is secure. So where you have spare cash, spare line of credit, it's a great time to set up an investment portfolio. Now, you don't have to rush, but you don't want to wait too long. If we get more good news, the markets will start to drift up. I don't think it's going to go up in a hurry, but it's a possibility. Now, even if we're sitting here in 2 weeks, 4 weeks, and shares are still 20 or 15% off where they were, they're still going to represent great buying compared to where they were. Third strategy, for those who are dollar cost averaging, and anyone who's employed is dollar cost averaging. If you're employed, your super contributions go into your super fund every month or every quarter. That's dollar cost averaging. So you could consider bringing that forward. We've got clients who are building share portfolio through dollar cost averaging. So for those with solid cash flow, with solid balance sheets, we're quite comfortable for them to bring forward 6 to 12 months of those payments. But once again, only where cash flow is strong. If they've got a good plan, the main thing is to stick with it. But for those that don't have a plan, or those who want to be opportunistic and they have the cash flow and balance sheet to support it, it's a great time. So number 4 there is for your super, consider moving up a risk profile. If you look in the top right-hand corner, we tend to classify people as either being growth, balanced, conservative, etc. So your super will sit somewhere on the scale. So for some of our clients right now, we're suggesting they jump up 1 notch, which effectively means they're buying more shares at a downturn. Once again, only do that if you've got a plan. This is not the time to be speculating, but if it helps as part of your plan, it can be an appropriate strategy. And that's my last tip there, which is get a good plan in place. And for those of you that aren't clients, I'll show you how to do that in a minute. So they're the 6 main tips we're using for people working. For our retired clients, and I know we've got a couple on the line, the tip is to make sure your cash flow is solid. You've got good reserves if your clients of ours. You can survive off those reserves with income for 3 to 5 years. You won't need to do that. You could consider using some of those reserves to buy, maybe a year's worth of that income to buy into the other parts of the portfolio at the moment. So let's have a look at our process. So this is more important for our existing clients who've been through this process, for our people who've just been watching our stuff but haven't used our services at this stage. This is how we work. We take the time to understand you, and I'm going to go through a case study as we do this. So understanding our clients is about getting a complete, crystal clear picture of who and what's important to them, understanding their financial journey, understanding their fears and frustrations, and getting a crystal clear picture of their financial position. So let me jump to our case study and so these names have been changed, but the data is pretty much the same as someone we saw this week. And when I say saw, we're doing 100% of our meetings at the moment via Zoom, the way you're watching this, and we can do those. We've been doing Zoom meetings for years, so it's second nature to us. So John and Mary here, John's got a good job. It's paying well. Mary's actually just been put on standby, so she's not earning this $50,000. But step 1 for us is a crystal clear picture of someone's financial position. These guys have a home they've just bought with a high debt. They've got pretty good investment properties, including their former home. They've got reasonable super, and they've got some cash in offset accounts and a few little shares. So that's their position. We also look at things like insurances, etc. So crystal clear position of where they are. Then we go to step 2. Step 2 is to set meaningful goals. These are goals based on the things that are important to them. They're goals based on what they need to spend, on their lifestyle. So they're things like, and for these guys, those goals were around, and I'm going to jump to, just bear with me, the start of building their goals calculator. And we do these, for those of you that are clients, you've been through this in the strategy session. For those of you that aren't clients, this is what we go through. So for John and Mary, we set their goals, and we simply ask them 4 questions. If you're retired right now, how much would you need coming in each year to pay for life? And they answered $75,000. We said, would that cover all the good things, or would you need some more to allow for travel? when we get back to normal and those things? They said, yeah, probably another 35. So for them, 110,000 a year for life, that gives a target of 1.9 million in today's dollars, which is a target of $2.7 million. Now, in our strategy session, we explain how we work out those numbers and what they mean. I don't have time to do that today, I'm afraid. So we set the target 2.7 million in this case, 13 years. So we've now got the goals. We do set other goals around estate planning, around housing, whether they want to buy a new house, whether they're going to sell a house, around their family, how much they want to help family, and the type of things that will drive their lifestyle. Then we move to stage 3, where we make sure their foundations are strong. I won't spend a lot of time on this. It's making sure you've got the right insurances, making sure your wills are up to date, make sure you've got the right super that's really smart, make sure you've got the right accountant, lawyers, other professionals in your world, making sure your debt's under control, cash flow under control, and tax under control. All those things just create the letters in perfect, so making sure we've got the foundation set up. We then move to step 4, which is to design and implement smart strategies. So for John and Mary, we model with them live in a strategy session their super, and just with their current super, we can see their current super is going to get to about 764,000. Well, we did model them jumping up a risk profile here. They're in quite conservative investments, so it's a great time, as we said, to be moving up a risk profile. So that's going to get them about 764,000. We looked at their existing properties, and that's going to achieve some reasonable growth for them. And these are long-term growth rates, and we just used 4% there. We put all that together, and then we added a new strategy for them, and we're probably going to add some more strategies. But in this case, it was using some of the cash in their offset accounts to start a portfolio, and then debt recycling. And I'm not going to go into that strategy. For those that haven't watched our videos, you can subscribe to the videos on the website, or you can watch them again. But it's where we pay extra off the mortgage and then borrow it back to invest in the share market. So that strategy of paying an extra $3,000 off the mortgage for them and putting it in the share market is going to build $849,000 over the next 13 years. So you put those strategies together, you fine-tune their insurances, get all that stuff done, and in 13 years, given normal return, they're at $2.7 million. There's a fair chance they're going to get above normal return for the next 5 years because of the market dip that we're in at the moment. So going back to our strategy, so we then put in place those smart strategies, and that's, as we said, we use this to go through and come up with the strategies. Then we put in place smart investment strategies to take into account their spending, their cash flow, the right risk and asset allocation, and then our carefully constructed portfolio. We've been using a similar methodology for around 20 years. We know that it works through these downturns. It doesn't stop markets from going down, doesn't stop investments going down, but our clients live through it through careful portfolio construction and smart behaviour, and ultimately, making sure their estate goes to the right place. Step number 6 is the regular review. So at the moment, we're busily doing reviews. So 2 reviews this morning, all done by phone or Zoom with our clients. So those reviews, we are literally our 10-point review plan. So it's a comprehensive financial checkup, et cetera, et cetera. So let me get down to my final tips and closing words. We've been through the case study. So my biggest tip, and I've seen that most people fail when it comes to finances, and it's not because of lack of strategy ideas, it's not because of lack of doing things, but it's generally because they don't have a plan. So my biggest tip to close off with here is to achieve an awesome independent financial retirement, you need to be executing a good financial plan. For our clients right now who have a plan and who are executing that and who continue to make smart decisions, they'll be absolutely fine through this crisis and they'll hit their goals. They might hit it a bit sooner, they might hit it a bit later, but they will hit their goals. For those that don't have a plan, they'll tend to react to those things. So if you'd like some help with that, for those of you that aren't clients, and by the way, for my clients listening, I know I've spoken to a lot of you, not all of you, in the last few weeks. If you'd like to act on some of the things I've talked about, please reach out through the team. For those of you that aren't clients, if you'd like some help through this, we've allocated 10 appointments in the next few weeks for those that are ready to take some action. So it's designed for those that are ready to take some action. If you go to, and you're going to get an email within the next 30 minutes that can conclusion here, but you can go to this address here, which is go.onehub.com/Rob McGregor. Now, this is only for people that aren't clients. So for those of you that are clients, if you'd like to talk to us about putting some more of these strategies in place, please ring the office or email the team. For those of you that aren't clients yet, you can go to this site and book a session in, and we'll take you through a strategy session just like the one we talked about there. And in the next month, we should be able to help you set up a plan and help you have in place or be ready to set up in place strategies to help you get through. That's the end of my presentation. I'm just going to see if there's any questions. That link will stay up there. So please feel free to type in any questions, comments, and we've managed to, let me just check, we've managed to keep everyone listening. I hope you haven't been too distracted during that. And if not, so have we got any questions there, guys? None. I'm going to count down 30 seconds, so if there's no questions by then, I am going to say goodbye. I wish you all the best through this. Keep safe. Yeah, all these things we're doing will work. We will come out of this on the upside. The world will get back to normal. And I'm just looking, I think I've got one question or comment here. And so thank you, a few thank yous. Thanks, John, appreciate that. Hopefully I've answered the questions you've had. Appreciate, yeah, thank you. Got a few thank yous there. All the best, everyone, and once again, reach out to those that need helping. We love helping people get through this. We love helping people build awesome independent retirements, and we know this is the time when most people need some help. So we are open, working harder than ever. Look forward to talking to you soon. Thank you, and talk soon.